Brian Keene with us from BKD Advisors. He is somebody who's an intricate part of Logan and its auditing processes. And he's been kind enough to be with us today to talk a little bit about our W-4 and what that form is, and then how to fill it out properly, and kind of what the tax implications are for employees when it's filled out correctly, but also when it's filled out incorrectly. And just kind of walk us through, what that looks like, because it's a pretty new form for most employees, and it can be kind of confusing. So I'm going to turn this over to Brian. So Brian, take it away. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so my name is Brian Keene. I'm a CPA, CGMA. We're actually our firm merged with another large accounting firm, and we're called Forvis now. So that's been a change since June 1st. But now we're the 8th largest accounting firm in the nation, so we've got a lot of resources. But without further ado, let's just dive into this very exciting topic of how to prepare a Form W-4, which is titled an Employee's Withholding Certificate. So let me share my screen. And I know it takes a second for it to pop up, so just tell me when we're there.
It's up.
All right, perfect. All right, so currently we've got a new W-4 form 2022, and I'm going to assume that most employees have filled out a newer W-4, but probably not the 2022 form, because this was just recently released, and it has some new verbiage on it that prior W-4s did not have. And that verbiage, actually, if you can see my mouse right here, this IRS W-4 app or Estimator, this tool is largely going to drive how you fill this form out. In the past, before the tax law change of 18, the W-4 was fairly simple. You put, whether you're single, married, filing jointly, or head of household. You put down the number of exemptions, which, back when we had exemptions, let's say they were like $3,000 per person. And then essentially, if you had any other withholdings that you wanted, you could put that in there, and off you went. And typically, the payroll software was very accurate. But when the House Ways and Means Committee, that's who writes tax law for our government, or that's where it starts in Congress, with the 2018 tax law change, they said, hey, we are going to simplify some of these forms. And the W-4 was one of the forms that they said they were going to simplify. And it went from a 1-page form to a 4-page form, to simplify it, right? That's our lovely government. So it did not actually get simplified. It only made it more complicated. But from a CPA or accountant standpoint, I understand what they were trying to do. The new form that they issued is trying to capture the employee's total income portfolio so that essentially you don't over withhold unless you want to, because the goal was to get as much of your hard-earned payroll dollars in your pocket during the year instead of having the government essentially withhold it and get it back to you in a refund. The thought behind it was, again, to have that money in your pocket where you could spend it now, thus spur the economy. So that's the theory behind it. Now, a lot of people use their federal and state withholdings as kind of a forced savings account, myself included. I always have had a little extra withholding put in there so that at the end of the year, when I do my tax return, I roughly get $1,000 back. Well, of course, when the new W-4 came out, that didn't happen, and I was really close to break even. So even myself had to do some additional withholdings. So again, the goal of this form is to not over withhold. And so again, Congress wants you to think about your total household income. So if you are a household with 2 jobs, and I'm going to focus kind of on the married filing jointly because it's the more complicated. Marking the single or married filing separate, you're not going to have as many steps to go through. And we will start by going over essentially the paper version of this withholding certificate. But as you will see here on step 2, they actually say this: you use the estimator for the most accurate withholding. That is absolutely correct. And as you will see as we go through this paper version, when it says the extra withholding amount as compared to the estimator that I just went out and used the same figures that are on this W-4 on their estimator, they are very different. So I strongly encourage you to use the new estimator, which is on the irs.gov website, and I'll show it to you here shortly, to do this, because it provides a lot more fields for income and deductions that this form does not. So it takes into account all sorts of things. So with that said, we'll see that here shortly, but we'll go over the paper version now. And as we're looking at this form W-4, there are actually only 2 steps that are required. And it is step 1, where you have to put your name, legal name, social security number, current address, and then whether you are filing single or married filing separately, married filing jointly, or a qualifying widower, or head of household. Again, your married filing jointly is the most complicated. So anything we go over can also essentially apply to the single as far as the tax estimator and so forth. So, all right. So again, first step, fill out step 1 with all your accurate information. In this case, we're just going to say Joe is married filing jointly. Then you can move down to step 2. Now, step 2, again, you can choose this. I rarely see step 2 being chose, because in this box right here, if there are only 2 jobs total, you may check this box, do the same on your W-4 for the other job, but it has to be a job with similar pay. So 2 people making $60,000 a year, great, or 100,000, whatever it is, they just need to essentially be the same, or just like it says, otherwise, more taxes are going to be withheld than need be. I rarely see this checked. So if we go down to moving along the lines, we go down to step 3. Step 3 is for your dependents. Now, what is a dependent? A dependent is someone living in your household that you are providing more than half of their care, food, clothing, household rent, so forth. In this case, I wanted to do 2 children under the age of 17 and 1 over the age of 17, because there are different amounts for the child tax credit. In this case, under 17 qualify for $2,000. Anyone over 17 living in your home as a dependent, so let's say mom, dad, not grandma, grandpa kind of thing, or an elderly uncle or aunt or someone like that you are taken care of in your home, those individuals qualify for $500 of credit. So in this case, we've got two under 17, one over 17. So we put down, doing the math, $4,500. Then we move to step 4. Step 4 is for other income deductions if you are doing itemized deductions. I have, since the tax law change, I rarely see anyone putting down itemized deductions. The reason being, married filing jointly for 22, that deduction, the standard deduction, is $25,900. So that's typically hard to beat, unless you've got multiple mortgages, on a first and second home, and maybe one of them's a jumbo loan, so you're really getting hit with interest. You're maxing out your $10,000 estate tax deduction. You might have some medical. Typically there, you don't see medical unless, maybe someone's got a full new set of teeth, a full new set of teeth is going to run you $30,000 to $40,000. So again, typically we're going to see just a standard deduction, but if you do itemize, you can put this deduction right there if it goes over that amount, right? All right, so then we end up with this extra withholding that we plug in here, but we have to actually calculate this withholding. It's not like, hey, this minus this, put it here. Now that we're down to line C, the instructions, which are all on the second page, so it tells you instructions box by box. But again, I wouldn't use the paper version following these instructions because it doesn't capture everything. You could fill this out 100% correctly, and most likely you're going to over withhold. And again, we'll see that when we look at the estimator. And of course, here they're putting it all bold, consider using this estimator. So again, each box has a step with instructions. So, all right, so in this case, we've got two jobs. I had one just under 100,000. Here, we'll get to the table. And one just under 60,000. And using the table here, you always you start with the higher paying job first. Then go out onto the table to find your lower paying job. So in this case, I've got someone making essentially $100,000. $99,996 is what I've got in the estimator. And then the spouse making $59,999. So when taking these two into account, you find the higher paid here, then you move over horizontally to the lower paying job, in this case to $59.99, and this is the amount that you would want for essentially extra withholding based on married filing jointly. So remember this number, we got 8,120. You then take that number and you put that number up here. Then if you had three jobs, we'd have another an amount here. I typically, most households have two. If you do have three and you have questions later, I can definitely give you my email or so forth, and I can help you work through those. So you put that same amount from page 4 right there, and then down here you've got the amount of pay periods. Typically, if you're bi-weekly, every other week, you have 26 pay periods. So that's the case. So then you put your 26 there. Then you divide line 1 by line 3 to give you the amount of extra withholding. Let me back up a little bit. This was to to go over if you want to do standard deduction versus itemized. Typically, I see people doing itemized around this amount. Again, this is the standard deduction. This will help you decide which one's the better one to take. So in this case, obviously, it's 25,900, and that's going to be the case for, I would say, 99% of tax filers. All right, so this 312 then gets put right up on page 1, right here, and that's what the instructions say. Hey, with that amount of pay periods, and this amount of income, you need and have an extra $312 withheld in order to essentially break even, right? And how the average employee would know to fill this out is beyond me, because your spouse that's working also has to do this. And when the spouse is doing this, they have to make sure that, let's say it's the lower spouse is the lower income spouse is preparing this. They have to make sure they're communicating with the higher earning spouse on what is on their W-4. Because what we have been seeing over the last 2 years is both spouses have been putting down the dependent information and essentially doubling up on the amount of tax credits that they would get on their return, which ends up putting that person in typically a tax liability position, because they've essentially said, hey, in this case, we have paid $4,500 more in credit towards our taxes than we were allowed. So it's not only $4,500 of tax payment goes away. So it is only done on one of the jobs, and use the highest paying job to do that. That I know has caused a lot of problems over the last couple of years. So, I mean, this is as basic as, or not as basic, but this is, I think, a typical Form W-4 filled out by someone that's married filing jointly, in the typical income range, of one of 100,000, the other of 60,000. So taking the same information that we have here, we can use, I'm going to move this over, the tax estimator, which is found right on irs.gov, right on their main sheet, or front page of their website. And if you scroll down, you've got the tax estimate, withholding estimator right here. So I've already started one where we weren't wasting too much time with me just typing things in. So if you were to start it, it asks you essentially a lot of the same questions as this W-4 does, but it also includes many other pre-tax and post-tax items that would affect the amount of withholding that the Form W-4 does not have, as far as calculating that extra withholding if need be. This also, when we get to the very end to the results, has a sliding scale that you can adjust to say, hey, if I want a refund, what do I need to withhold? And we'll see that when we get there. All right. So for Joe employee, married filing jointly, we select that. We also say that we have another job, or our spouse has another job. We're not going to select any of this right now. I mean, if some of these things pertain to you, obviously go ahead and select it. It is going to take into account that you essentially could have a bigger standard deduction, especially when individuals over 65, the standard deduction goes up higher. All right, so we're just going to say, hey, we plan on claiming those dependents that we entered over on our W-4. So in this case, we hit next and it comes to the income and withholding. We want to say 2 jobs because that's typical, and it's going to go over the first job, typically be your highest paying job first. We go in and we say we're salary, and it really doesn't matter whether you mark hourly or hourly. What that will do is essentially just give different boxes on capturing your current pay. So, and I'm going to suggest everyone, after we do this training, when you do have time, I would absolutely go out there and do this, and then update your W-4 within Paylocity. All right, so moving on. So we're going to mark salary. We're going to say, hey, this is a job that we have all year, and it asks for the frequency. We're going to say every 2 weeks because that corresponds with 26 pay periods within a year. If it is just twice a month, obviously that's going to be 24 pay periods a year, and then once a month 12. And if it's weekly, 52. Using let's see. So then we're going to go ahead and enter some of our payroll. So I said that our last pay stub was on 6/15. We're going to enter the wage for that payroll, the gross wage. So we've got this corresponds with the $100,000 job, and it'll ask salary to date. And what I would say or recommend doing is just have your most recent pay stub on hand. And let's say, let me back up a little. Let's say this is you're brand new to the company and you're filling this out. Given that you can go into Paylocity at any time and change this, and not only Paylocity, but any job you have, you can change that W-4 whenever you want. And what I would suggest is get a pay stub or 2 if you're brand new, and then go back in and do this estimator, because then you'll have the data that this is going to require to be able to get that most accurate withholding, and then you can go back into Paylocity and update your W-4 information. See how Congress simplified things? Anywho, all right. So based on this information, it'll actually calculate, and it did, $99,996, and it asks you if that's correct. And we're saying yes. It's going to ask, well, what was the federal withholding thus far? And in this case, based on if you were just to mark married filing jointly and nothing else, it's going to say your base withholding would be $306 a pay period. But that won't actually get you to break even. But that's the tables that the IRS is applying right now. And you'll see when we get to the results, you'll actually see this $306 in their calculation. So then it asks, hey, what's the federal taxes paid year to date? That's going to be on your pay stub. So you just enter that in. Then you've got the 401k. In this case, I'm just saying, hey, we're doing 3%. So we've got $115 per pay period. Year to date at 13 pay periods, you get your $1,494. I'm also saying that we've got a $50 pay period contribution to an HSA or a flex spending account, and then times that by 13. That's the amount year to date. And this is what's really nice about this is we can keep entering more data. Let's say someone does get a bonus or something like that. Now, I didn't want to go through and select everything and make it too complicated, but like I said, there are fields to add here where you can completely capture your entire income portfolio. All right. Then we've got the second one. We also say it's salary. We say it's all year, every 2 weeks, same pay period. Now this one is going to be for the 59 999. Well, I had $1 or so off, so it's actually 59,990 as far as the IRS goes. But we say this is going to be the wage, the gross wage. This is the salary to date, just as it is calculated above, 13 pay periods. It will ask, is this right? And it's close enough. It's within $9, so go ahead and say yes. This is the standard amount based on this income, nothing, no other adjustments. This would be the standard amount of federal tax withheld. This would be that number times 13. We also say, hey, this person also does a 401k, 3% of that salary up here is this $69, times the amount of pay period. So we put in our annual amount. And again, this is going to be on our pay stub. And again, why I recommend going back after you started work. If none of this has happened yet, maybe there's a vesting period or something like that before you can start contributing to your retirement plan. Go back once you can to start entering this stuff and update your W-4. We're also going to say, hey, we've got a little bit of other income coming in. In this case, I'm going to say, hey, maybe we get $3,000 of interest or dividends. Maybe someone left, mom and dad have passed away and they have left you some money that you have reinvested, in bonds or whatever, and you're getting $3,000 a year in interest. Or, it could be various different types of income, but let's just say in this case it's interest. So 3,000 there. So then we go next. I'm also saying, hey, one of these individuals has a student loan and has been paying it, and they have $1,100 in student loan interest for the year. So I just drop that in. I'm just trying to pick very common things I see on tax returns. So we put in 1,100 there. As it says right up here, it is capped at 2,500. So at least it tells you that. A lot of times people bring in their tax return and information, and yeah, they have paid way more than 2,500, and they think that it's all going to get a deduction, but in fact, no, it is capped at 2,500. There's a whole bunch of other deductions that, educator expense. Let's say if the spouse is an educator, there's I think it's a $250 tax credit and so forth. So you can add all these different things in here, and it is going to affect what is going to be calculated for your withholding. And so these things just are not part of the paper form. So this is going to definitely give you a more accurate picture. All right, moving on. So now we go into the deductions. We're going to go ahead and say we're doing the standard deduction like I showed you on the paper form, $25,900. Skipping over the itemized, hit next. Now we need to do the child and dependent credits. It actually wants you to put their age because, again, at 17, they no longer qualify for the full amount of tax credit. Even though I think, I have a 22-year-old, and and when he was 17, boy, that's really when he started getting expensive because, they can drink a gallon of milk in a day. So I don't know why Congress wrote, or decided to say that was the threshold where the credit is drastically reduced, but that's what they came up with. They had to balance the budget at some point to be able to give tax credits out and somewhere else. So anyways, given that this is 11, 13, and 17, I did not put anything in here for child credit. If this one was under 5, most likely you would have some sort of child care, if both spouses are working, you would, you'd put 1 and then enter however much you paid that, daycare for the year. Earned income tax credit, I did not fill this out because of the, if you're making roughly $160,000 in W-2 wages, you're not going to qualify for something like this. All right. I'm skipping over foreign tax credit or your retirement savings and things like that. And the reason I'm doing that is since we put in the 401k deduction above, those are pre-tax. So typically you won't have very many other items that are going to come out for a tax savings if you're using your 401k. You might have some instances and you can select that and then, put it in there. You might have residential energy credits, if you bought solar panels or a biomass fireplace or something like that. There are, like I said, there's just a ton of different little credit boxes that could apply to you, but typically I don't see these, but they're out there. So if that is something that you have, all you have to do is expand the box, enter the information, and it'll adjust. So then we say next, and here we get the results. And here's what's neat. In this case, we're going to owe, even though if we put in married filing jointly and we just said, let's say we just didn't put any more information, any extra withholding, and the spouse does the same. With that amount of income being withheld, you are still going to owe tax. And that's typically where people kind of get freaked out, because in the past, before the tax law change and on the old W-4, if you did married filing jointly and you didn't have any extra withholding, you typically had a refund. Not anymore. Again, the Congress's goal was to get as much money in your pocket during the year to spend in the economy as possible. And here's what's really neat. It shows you the results and kind of what to do. So based on these wages, you should be withholding $496 from each check, so $190 more. There's that 306. That would be your standard withholding, as you saw back on the first page where I put that. But that obviously is not enough. And if we used, again, let me pull this over. If we used this worksheet and used the table in the back, it says to have an extra $312 withheld. Well, the estimator has $190 withheld to be able to essentially break even. So the paper file or the paper application is not, in my opinion, is not very accurate. And I'm assuming that's why they keep on that form, they're pushing us to use the estimator. So in this case, we'd say, all right, we're obviously shortchanging ourselves to be able to break even. And it tells us, hey, we need to put this $190 more on our W-4. And here's the neat thing. It says how to adjust your withholding. It actually then tells you to either, online or paper. In your guys' case, it's online. It tells you what to select. And you would have already done this. But then it's saying here, enter 190 in that extra withholding. If you do that based on these wages, you will break even. As far on the first one. Then on the second one, it does exactly the same thing. And it has you put $83 on that W-4 for extra withholding. So it provides you the exact number that you need based on that income, this married filing jointly status, and these and your base withholdings. But here's the neat thing. Adjust your results to avoid owing a balance. So let's say, hey, we typically like, $1,000 back each tax season, because that's what we use, as our reservation money to go down to Disney World with the kids or whatnot. So we can actually slide this estimator over to 1,000, release, and it completely changes the amount we need to withhold. So then it went from 190 to 243, total withholding per paycheck of 549. And so you come down here and it tells you, of course, the government, it says you needed an extra 243, but you get down here and they've got an extra dollar. Anyways, and the same for the second job. Instead of $83, now we're at 106, and it tells you where to put it. So again, I strongly recommend you using this estimator. And at the end of it, you can use the print button to print all this out in case, you don't have time to go and do this on Paylocity or fill the paper version out. Because you could use this and do the paper version and hand it in. Obviously, with Paylocity, you don't have to do that. You can just log in to your site and change it online using this information. So with that said, I think that kind of covers the basics of it. I'm assuming we should move to some questions. If I don't know if you want to send the question in via chat, or there's not, given there's only 12 participants, I don't think we'd walk over each other too much. If you just wanted to unmute yourself, and then we could talk about a specific situation.
Yeah, that's
and we could
perfect,
actually
Brian.
we could show in the tax estimator that situation if you wanted. Keep it general unless you want your coworkers to know everything.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're talking about your dependents, when you're talking about the child dependents, and if you pay over whatever percentage of their care, now what about a child that lives with you but went to college, away at college, and you are still paying for most of their expenses? Do you include that?
You do. You
Okay.
do. So you can still claim those student dependents.
Okay.
Oh, and well, if you were still, let's say even when they're out of college, and if you're still providing over half of their care, you essentially could still mark them down and get the $500 credit. Now, when that dependent files their tax return, they would have to mark that they're a dependent of another
Okay.
taxpayer, because
Gotcha.
then it adjusts on their end. But you would absolutely get the credit for $500 currently for that dependent. And I see that a lot, where there's taxpayers that are still claiming their kid that's, well, not really their kid. They might be in their upper 20s, but maybe they're a grad student or something, and they're still funding their college and living expenses and so forth. So yeah, absolutely,
And
you
with
get a
that, you just said something too. So they have graduated, they're going to grad school, but we, as my husband, we've agreed that we will pay for her undergrad student loans. How would that go in there?
So you could get the interest deduction on your 1040, and on that 1040, it's gonna, the form that your tax preparer, or if you do it yourself, say like on TurboTax,
Uh-huh.
it actually is gonna ask for the student name and social for where that student loan interest is coming from. Same with if you got what's called a 1098-T for tuition that you're paying. So it's, for that first 4 years where you're taking the American Opportunity Credit, and it has you put down the institution and the student name, social, and all that. So it connects the dots because not only do you get that 1098-T or the 1099 interest. Oh, I'm actually, that's not the form number on that one. It's escaping me right now, but the IRS gets that form as well. So there's a matching function.
Okay.
Now, have I seen where the child student gets their tax return in like via TurboTax before the parents, and they go and claim themselves? Because if they're using TurboTax, they've got this little box up in the right-hand corner or left-hand corner that is either green or red for, red if they owe, green if they're getting a refund. And as they're putting their things in and they see that green box growing, they're not thinking, oh, that's really belongs to my parents, and I'm just going to put my stuff in there because I like the refund because I want to go spend it. And so I see that a lot. And then when the parents file the return, it is accepted, but then they typically get a love letter saying we have adjusted your return based on someone else claimed the 1098-T, and they're getting the opportunity credit and you're not.
Okay.
And then you just have to have that frank discussion with the child.
Thank you very much.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Previous, obviously, with the old forms, to kind of do what you were talking about with the 4 savings, we have 2 kids, and my husband and I would just put 0 on our W-4.
Yes.
And it always seemed to work out. Like we've gotten refunds, which we've been happy with. With this new form, I hear you're saying definitely do, the full calculator. But would it be wise to just kind of continue doing that?
No, so that 0 on the old form, so pre-18, the 0 was the number of exemptions. And back when we had exemptions on 1040s, let's say it was $3,000 per person, and that's essentially like a $3,000 tax payment. Well, when you put that 0, that meant that it wasn't going to act like you were getting that. And so, depending on how many dependents or not dependents, just people on the return, let's say a family of 4, that's $12,000 of tax credits. And if you put 0, it acts like that you're not going to get that. So it's going to withhold tax on an additional $12,000. But when the tax law change happened, they did away with exemptions. So there was no more $3,000. That $12,000 gone. So that's why. Well, there's no real 0 anymore since there's no exemptions.
Okay.
And I have seen that where essentially people will fill it out and they'll just write 0 in. And I'm like, okay, well, that means you don't want any extra withholding. So it's going to withhold the least amount possible. And that's why you've been hearing the last couple of years screaming about I owe. Why do I owe? I never owed in the past. But if you were to have taken your paychecks, and it's kind of hard to do comparison because typically people have pay adjustments or maybe they have some other pre-tax thing going on that they didn't in prior years. But if somehow we could actually do apples to apples, you would see on average, using the $100,000 job here, on average, you would see $115 more in your take-home pay than you did prior. So you're getting it during the year instead of getting a refund. And a lot of times what I've seen with my clients, especially ones that essentially just left it blank, they're getting more during the year and they're not breaking even. They're owing.
That's not what I want.
Yeah,
that's not what I want.
that's why I
Okay.
think this estimators is a game changer for people that really want to make sure that they're going to get a refund, or at least not owe, because you can put
Perfect.
all your income portfolio for both spouses in there. Now, again, the key is making sure both people are on the same page. Where only like the instruction said, only do it on one of or the higher paying W-4 for those child credits and so forth.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Looks like we had a chat question. All right, what if you are paid biweekly and your spouse is paid weekly and spouse has the higher income? That's a great question. So if we go back over here and we say we could just change this to weekly, and then essentially change all our estimates. Obviously, I was doing one on bi-weekly, so all these numbers would get cut in half, and then and so forth. So using this calculator, you should be able just to adjust it, and it's going to spit out the new results. And again, using those tables, I was really shocked at how poorly the instructions are for filling that paper version out. Oh, did you see that I changed I changed that to weekly? Now it's thinking we were getting the 38.46 every week, and now it's saying, hey, we owe this amount, but we would have adjusted that typically. I just, for presentation purposes right now and time purposes, I didn't cut it in half and do that. But you can see there that, we really need to be withholding 692 now, 386 more, and so forth. I think I answered that. Laura, did that answer you? All right, thank you. All right, let's see. Any other questions? I know this is so exciting.
One more. So sorry.
Yeah.
Since I understand why your example had the two incomes. If your family, if there are multiple jobs, the online calculator will still manage all of that easily, correct?
Absolutely. Because
Perfect.
again, you could say, or essentially, you can just say one job, where it did the, here it is. We could just say no, one job, and it's going to adjust everything accordingly. It's not going to ask you about your second source of income when you do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I sure wish they would have put this out when they changed the law, but they didn't even issue the new W-4 till 2020. They had essentially 2 tax years that the old W-4 that had all the exemptions that didn't apply anymore. That was the IRS standard form, which it didn't match up with the 1040. So especially those first 2 years, in my opinion, that was a bloodbath when it came to why do I owe? And you did see, whole shows devoted to it on, say CNBC, what is that, CNBC and MSNBC or whatever. All those were talking about people being shocked at the end of the year. This year the big shocker was the advanced child tax credits that people got. You got them starting July last year, and those are typically what shows up as a credit on your 1040. And I'm glad they got it so far in this year. They don't have that, because when filing the 1040s, as I think most people know that had those had dependents that qualified, you had to report what you received. Well, from what I'm seeing is a lot of people got that wrong. And so let's say they did get $3,000, but they said, oh, I only got $1,500. Well, we file it. It gave them an additional $1,500 tax credit. And now all these notices are rolling out that says, hey, we have adjusted your tax return and now your refund is less, or now you owe, and it's because you underreported what we gave you. That's very tough, because there was nothing on your W-4 that you could have done to account for that. And it's because Congress sort of changed how they handled those tax credits in the middle of the game, to essentially move the goalpost. And so there was quite a few people that thought, hey, I'm going to get a refund and so forth because of these tax credits, child tax credits, that no, they're just not getting that refund. They already got it, and now, unfortunately, they owe. I'm sure that happened to some people. All right, we've got another question coming in. I haven't updated my. Yes, I would, but I have an option to file married, filing single. That helped us to receive a tax refund. I wouldn't need a new. So, on the question on married filing single, yeah, married filing single is going to essentially withhold at the single rate. So if you do mark that and then you don't put any more, additional withholding and stuff, it is going to withhold more. So the tax tables are all a little bit lower as far as the thresholds on jumping into the next tax bracket. So that could be a way to, a rudimentary way to make sure you don't owe. But I think I would still go out and do the tax estimator and I know I'm a CPA and I see these things all the time, but it took me less than 5 minutes to run through that. So, it's, for me at least, it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, it's basic questions. If you've got your or your most recent pay stub, you should be able to answer all this stuff. But yes, you absolutely could do the married filing single, and it is going to withhold more than married filing jointly. But if you do that, I would absolutely have the spouse do that as well. All right. Do we have any other questions? Oh, here's another one. All right. So on a teen, it's going to depend on if that, on what they make. Okay, so depending on how much they're making, they might see no withholding at all. And it's going to be based on their standard deduction. So let's say, standard deduction for someone that's singles, whatever, 12,000 something. And they only are going to make 6,000 for the year. They don't need to withhold anything from their W-2, and most likely, depending on the tax software or payroll software, and they're all different. And I wish everyone would calculate it exactly the same, but some of them just change a little bit. But in this case, let's say they work during the summer and they make $6,000. They're not going to have any federal or state income tax liability, and wouldn't have to file a tax return because they don't have anything owed. And if you don't owe, there's no tax return required. And especially if there's a refund, the IRS isn't even going to send you a letter, because they'll keep your money all day. Now, if you owe, they'll send you a letter. The only reason that child wage earner would want to file is if federal tax was withheld. But if if they're making minimum wage or say $15, $12 an hour, and it's just a summer job, the tax software should know, or the payroll software shouldn't essentially calculate that out and not withhold. And if for some reason someone, let's say in your organization, is not seeing any tax withholding, federal tax withholding, that is typically based on what they put in on their W-4. Probably married filing jointly, a bunch of tax credits. So let's say this person makes $30,000 or $40,000 a year, and they're married. The other spouse doesn't work. They're going to get nearly $26,000 a standard deduction. Then if you've got let's say you've got 3 kids, then you got another $9,000 of child tax credit. So now you're getting pretty close to not having any sort of taxable income based on all your deductions. So you would see some of the initial paychecks with no federal withholding on that, because, and especially if you're hourly, it's the software doesn't really know that you're going to be working the same amount of hours all throughout the year. Now, if you were salary and you were making more than all the stuff you put in on that W-4, it should withhold some. And not very much in this instance, but it should withhold a little bit. That's typically why you would see no federal wage withholding on a pay stub, is the amount of pay based on what you put on the W-4 and then projected out through the rest of the year. So, well, hopefully I didn't make anyone's ears bleed with this with all this information, but I tell you what, if anyone has questions, Angie, feel free to provide my email address. I don't mind answering these. I guess hopefully it's not super complicated where I'd have to do any research or anything like that. But if I see that it's coming from one of your employees, I'll definitely, and this is not something I'm going to code time to, but I'll definitely help them out to the best of my ability to answer your guys' questions.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate you being with us today and explaining all of that. It is complicated for the regular person who's just trying to make sure they pay enough taxes, and not owe. So
yeah.
I really appreciate you breaking it down and taking our questions.